Hi all, Ben. I was going to talk about the importance of physical security and networking. I've got a little bit of a story and then a demo. So this is kind of something that came up a couple months ago, and Willem told me I was giving a talk today or else. So I kind of just had to find something. So I promise this does dovetail in with RMHAM a little bit at the end. So anyway, a couple months back, my local ISP installed this thing in my apartment, and it was not giving me internet, which is obviously totally unacceptable. So, it's flipping? Oh, clipping. Apparently there were some technical difficulties. That one looks okay. I don't know. We'll move on. Good to move on. So anyway, when this happens, we definitely need to break into this device and figure out what's wrong with it. We don't have the password for it. We do have permission to poke at it because the local ISP is nice, and some of you probably know them. And I don't think they believed I could break into it anyway, so a little learning experience. We do know that we have pretty up-to-date firmware on this device because it advertises over a protocol called LLDP to anything connected to it what it is. How do we approach this, right? How about some off-the-shelf things? Well, if you've been following MikroTik for a while, there are a couple of research groups that have broken into MikroTik quite thoroughly. Unfortunately, the very nice automated script to root a MikroTik only works on the next version older. Funny how that happens. We could, of course, try to attack something like Winbox, which has had scads of security vulnerabilities over the years. It's probably not very hard to do, but that sounds like work, and I'm a busy person. We could, of course, go for the physical angle. Maybe we can find a JTAG header, right? And this would allow us to single-step the CPU to overwrite bits of memory. Really cool debug protocol. Basically, everything has this feature. Just a matter of finding the test points on the board. So we can rip the case off the thing. And you might notice there's an obvious thing. I'll point it out in a second. And terrible shot of the bottom. Sorry, this was put together in a fairly short period of time, so cell phone pictures. We do find a serial port, and serial ports are great. If you can get to the Linux console, there are some break sequences you can send to a default Linux install and get it to let you manipulate the kernel. And this probably is a JTAG header. Oh, for sure? Have you tried? This pin layout there are like 3 standard JTAG pin layouts. This is one of them. That said, soldering stuff is hard. My business card says I'm a software engineer. So we could come back to that. That will absolutely work. But is there an easier way? Well, we talked about NetBoot or net install a little bit earlier, I think. Those of us in the computing industry typically call this Pixie boot. The basic idea is that you plug your device into a network with some special DHCP configuration and load an OS onto it over the network. And yeah, this doesn't involve soldering things. And if I'm messing with my ISP's hardware, maybe that's a good thing. It's certainly more subtle. So if we look on the web a little bit about these, there's an alternative software stack for these called OpenWRT. It's pretty much an unmodified copy of Linux, and we can just net boot this onto the router. Not all MikroTik devices support this. Most of them do. They all use off-the-shelf CPUs. It's not too hard to port this to whatever you have lying around. So demos are hard. Live demos are hard. Joey is way braver than I am. So we're going to try a video instead, and I'm just going to play it and be quiet for a couple minutes.
All right, let's do a quick demo. So what I have here is
Oh, it's the microphone.
Radio?
might have to narrate. Whatever's feedback needs to mix off. Yeah, I heard me over here somewhere else, because this one was off. You might have to narrate. I'll narrate, but am I getting my audio somewhere?
Oh, your audio's
All right, and this one's off, so I can be standing here now?
Yes.
All right, sorry about the technical difficulties. Where are we? Anyway, the basic idea is I have one of these routers, and I am first resetting it and deploying a very basic config with, it's really blurry, some passwords, right? Some sample passwords for us to get. If we were a competent software engineering company, we would hash passwords and we would not be able to get them. But maybe that's not so much the case here. So I hard reset it while we were dealing with the technical difficulties. And we're logging in and we're going to set passwords because this is a current version of Router OS 6 and they're trying to do security. It insists on me setting one. Turns out this attack only works if you've actually set a password by hand on a user, like created a new user. I think what they're doing is they are logging every command entered into the device for all time. And if you just like up arrow to go through the history on the device, you'll see that it redacts the password. However, if you read it off the file system of the router, it's there. So I had a test user, I had, a couple of dumb passwords. And I apologize that this is cut off. The YouTube link, if you want the original version, is in the slide deck, and I'll leave it there for a while. And I swear it's not this, blurry. Anyway, so we do that. We reboot the router. These things will only net boot off the first port. So we move the network cable. We start a DHCP server. We're just going to use DNS mask because that's basically the full DHCP, TFTP, all the bits. If you've ever set up servers this way, you need a special file server, TFTP, and some DHCP flags. This config, or set of flags for DNS mask is almost the default OpenWRT recommended way of doing this. So it's not too hard to figure this out from the OpenWRT website. So we do that, we power it on, and for this particular device, you hold down the reset button. You'll see this second blue light come on, and then it'll start flashing. If you release the reset button while it's flashing, it will wipe the config on the router. Just keep holding it, and when it stops flashing and beeps, then it will try to net boot. And that will not erase the router. In fact, another thing I discovered doing this, even if you do reset the router, a lot of the old config is just still there in flash. It doesn't do any sort of secure wipe or anything. So you can get bits of the old config off the flash. So if you have, for example, passwords that you like sell one of these routers and I'll erase it, right? I can still get your password until such a time as it happens to overwrite that block in flash, which may be years down the line. So keep that in mind if you're getting rid of one of these. I didn't believe this worked. Like, this was the last thing I tried. These devices use a slightly weird old file system, so I figured I'd just mount the file system. No, I had to go find an ancient version of the Linux kernel to mount the file system. There's a whole thing. And then just as a last, wouldn't it be funny if I run strings on a copy of the file system image from the router and it's like, oh, there's the password. It's just really. So anyway, this chugs along and you can see it makes a request and we give it a copy of the OpenWRT image. And once OpenWRT has booted, it makes another request. But of course, OpenWRT assumes the first port is the internet. So it makes a DHCP request, but it won't let you get into the config interface. So we once again move the network cable. So it's a process. But we log in. And if you were doing actual forensics on one of these things, you would image the flash off to something else. So in the name of best practices, we're going to use a tool called DD to just get a block level copy of the flash. And for the sake of the demo, I happen to know these things have like 6 memory partitions on them. The 6th one is the one with the good stuff on it. There are ways of asking, and there are partition labels and things. MikroTik, of course, uses their own partitioning scheme, their own file system. It's very custom stuff for whatever reason. So I'm going to just read all the blocks off the flash and pipe them over SSH to my laptop. And that doesn't take very long. These devices have like a 20 megabyte flash. But you could take, and once you have that image, you can do whatever offline analysis you want on it. We're going to do something dumb and look for ASCII text in it. But there are tools like binwalk that will try to find image files or file system images or whatever it may be, right? There's some pretty standard forensics tools for this. Strings just rips out all the binary and spits anything that looks like ASCII. And you can see most of it's garbage because we're getting all the binaries from router OS and things like that. But if you page through this long enough, or if you just search for something clever like password, there they are. This is stunning. Like this is bad. MikroTik claimed they fixed this a few releases ago. And they did, in a way, right? The place that it actually stores the password is hashed. They just also store it in plain text.
So this essentially says you have to have access.
Yes, you do have to have access to the device to do this. So if we did some of the other things we talked about, like attacking Winbox or attacking one of the services on the device, we could do it remotely. And we'll flip back to the slides here. I think you probably get the idea. I demonstrate logging in. I demonstrate that I'm totally incapable of typing passwords. So that's fun. Anyway, this can't be real, right? I tried binwalk first. I tried mounting the file system. I tried all these things. And I tried strings just because I could, and there it is, right? I don't even know what to say. So if you find a security vulnerability like this, there's a industry standard thing you're supposed to do called responsible disclosure. Did I do it? No. Willem said, give me a talk now. That said, MikroTik has a security, oh, you want to defend yourself? Okay.
It was by Saturday.
All right, that's true.
Friday night, right?
Like Monday, but still. That said, if you read up, MikroTik does have a published security disclosure policy, and it eliminates a significant number of things. For example, misconfiguration, right? I would argue in 23, having a password set is a misconfiguration. And anyway, what do you expect from a $70 router, right? These things are cheap, and they do a ton for what they are. Yes, so what should we be doing here? Well, if I have a password on a device and I use the same password on all the other devices, maybe I'm an ISP and I set the same password on every customer device and I don't do any network isolation between customers. Now I, from the comfort of my living room, can log into my next door neighbor's router. This is bad. Don't do that. Or maybe I'm at the top of a tower, right? And I can get one of these Wi-Fi access points because it's on the top of a mountain and nobody's looking and do this and get the password for the entire 100 and whatever sites we talked about earlier. Bad. However, we could use something called public key cryptography instead, where the router sees a part of a key and you keep a part of the key. And so you can prove to the router that you have the private part of the key, but the router doesn't have to have the private part of the key. So if I can steal the key from the router, I can't do anything with it. And so this would be a much, much better design for this sort of thing. Of course, router OS messes this up and implements only old versions of this. And so if you have a current version of OpenSSH, you can't actually connect to the router without doing some config. Am I feeding back again? No. Okay, good. And other than that, the other best way to do this is to physically and software prevent people from getting to the config interface, right? If you can't talk to the thing at all, it's not a problem. So that means, you know, mechanical locks or something, right? And a lot of radio sites do this to some extent, but to some extent. Which brings us to RMHAM, right? If you're going to leave a bunch of these devices lying around on the top of mountaintops, anyone with climbing gear or a lockpick set can get to them. So you have to assume they're untrusted and a little bit compromised. I think historically that most hams don't do that. And if you use the same password on every device, if you get one, you get them all. So yes, this is a bit of a project. It only works on certain MikroTik hardware unless you want to do a little bit of software work. However, you only need to get one if you recycle the passwords, so don't recycle passwords. And that gets us back to single sign-on that came up earlier. That said, hopefully nobody would actually do that because, you know, the resources we put on radio sites are pretty fantastic public services, and, you know, don't do that. So anyway, practical security advice: don't use passwords. If you're going to use passwords, use unique passwords per device. If you really, really must use passwords, use two factors, right? Use a password and something else. And if you're going to program things into devices that you can't secure physically, use a two-part public-private certificate, key, secret, whatever. And make sure secure hardware can't be trusted by untrusted people. That's the, I mean, at the end of the day, that's it, right? If you have physical access to a device, you own the device. Full stop. Some devices make it harder than others, but so anyway, hopefully that sort of thing is interesting. It's not really the normal kind of talk, but exactly. Questions, comments?